Backstage at the Basingstoke Anvil, welcome and hello, John Mayall.
Hello, indeed.
34 dates into a 40-date back-to-back tour.
Well, it's 40 days, 40 dates in 39 days is what it is.
Right.
So you cut about a week's worth off there.
But it's a lot.
Well, it's usual for us. I mean, when we go on the road, that's what we're used to doing. We don't have days off.
Right. And how's it been going?
Excellent. All the reactions have been good. We've had a lot of totally full houses, so
Right.
it's been a big success.
Right. And the Peter Green and Splinter Group as the sort of the other act. When we last spoke about 10 years ago, Peter wasn't playing at all. How is it to be playing with one of your guitarists from the good old days?
Well, he's doing a lot better these days, very much so, and he's much more outgoing, and he seems to have it together.
Right.
It's good.
And the other, Buddy Whittington, is your guitarist, featured guitarist, has been since '93. Doesn't that make him the longest-serving Bluesbreaker featured guitarist?
No, Coco Montoya.
I thought that was
before him
possibly
was 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. So Buddy's coming up on that. Yeah.
Right. And a couple of albums that you've had recently that were high-profile albums was R. It was 40th anniversary.
Right.
Along for the Ride. Now
Yeah.
then, there's so many people involved there. Can you tell me about some of the happy memories that came from there?
That whole idea was Eagle Records decided that something special should be done as a one-off thing where I could gather together members of ex-Bluesbreakers, people I've worked with before, and also people whose music I've admired and wanted to play with. So it was like a wish list was presented to me to do something like this, and they provided all the facilities for these people to be around when we needed them, and it all worked out wonderfully. We did all the tracks with the regular band in Los Angeles, and whoever was in LA, people like Billy Preston was there, and Billy Gibbons were both there to join in on the original sessions. Red Holloway, of course. So. Having done all the tracks, then we took them over to England, and there we got Peter, and he was able to play on top of the track that we'd recorded in Los Angeles with Mick Fleetwood and John McVie and Steve Miller being the rhythm section.
Right.
So we did one track of that. Gary Moore happened to be in the same studio that we were doing the overdubs, so he just came down on his lunch break and whacked out his solo.
David Graham. Yes.
And Davey came in. Also, Jeff Healy happened to be in town, so that was really great too. So we got all these Dick Hexall Smith.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's quite a long list of people. And then we went to, on the way back home, we called in Chicago, and there we were able to get Shannon Kerfman, who flew in from Minneapolis, and Otis Rush, so those two were done in one afternoon. And then later on, when we were doing the mixing, that was where we picked up Steve Cropper and Johnny Lang for their parts, and the girl singers who David Z had worked with before. So
from Shannon and Johnny right through to Otis Rush, you've got several generations of blues talent.
Yeah. The youngest, of course, being Shannon, who was only 15, and Red Holloway at 72 being the eldest. So,
Right.
So a complete span of...
Very difficult question, but was there any particular track, was there an especially happy memory for you amidst all of those that you've talked about?
Well, they all were, they're all very personal pieces, just the same as any album I make. They have to mean something to me, and they have to be exciting, and they're all sort of very much the way we usually do things, the first or second take. And once you got the tracks, I mean, for somebody to put their solos on top of it, they only needed to hear it once, and then whatever they did first was it.
Yes. And David Z was producing. How did you meet David Z?
Well, I heard Johnny Lang's first two albums, and I thought he did a great job with those. So that's I requested to contact him.
Right.
And of course, he was real interested, and we've been together ever since for that album and for this current album, and also for onward the next whenever, so we're a great team.
Moving on to the current album Stories, which you're very much featuring on this tour.
Yeah.
How did that come together? That's very much a family affair, I gather. It's the band.
Yeah, I mean we did all the tracks were done within 5 or 6 days or something like that. So the whole album was, you know, like 3 weeks from start to finish as usual. We mixed it in Los Angeles, and there weren't any guest artists to add on it, with the exception of just for the percussion we had Lenny Castro come in to help out on the percussion of some things, and Maggie did the backup vocal on the Rick Vito Feels Just Like Home. So, you know, the songs were all things that I wrote 6 out of the 14, and the rest.
Where do you find the time to write songs with a schedule like?
Well, it's very easy because, you know, I only do 120 shows a year, which is a third of the year, and then I have 2/3 for home. And if we get a chance to do an album, the preparation is not that extensive, you know, because I can't read or write music, so we put but mainly do them just maybe the week before, round them all up, the material by other people, and the songs that I write more or less come together around about the same time.
Right, and 6 of them are on your album.
Right, yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then the songs by other people were people who have had previous experience with and or have met. Buddy and Julie Miller we met about a couple of weeks before we did the album, and we loved that song, Dirty Water.
Right.
Eric Bibb, of course, we did his World War Blues on the previous album. And Maggie, my wife Maggie Mayall, and Tom Canning put together The Witching Hour. We had Buddy and Joe contribute another one, their Pieces and Parts, and then Buddy had his Romance Classified, which was the first thing I'd heard him play back in '93. So that was a pretty strong song.
And the audience is lapping it up as well as the old material.
Oh, yeah,
it's not as though they want just the super.
I mean, these songs have adapted extremely well for live performance. Perhaps as good as it possibly can be. The fact that we do 10 out of the 14 live on any particular show is testament to that.
Right, right. Now going straight back, right down memory lane and to the late 50s, and I spoke to Huey Flint about a year or so ago.
Oh yeah.
And one of the sort of vivid memories that he has, one of the first vivid memories of you, was at your house in Manchester, where they may have been down the pub on a Saturday night, but you were staying at home, and you would have, during the week, you would have collated all that you'd listened to on Voice of America that was vaguely related to blues, and you would have catalogued it, and then on a Saturday night, Huey Flint would come round and you would play them all these blues that you picked up.
Oh yeah.
You were a fanatic from the very start, but there wasn't a lot of blues material around. Was that your way of getting around it?
Yeah, possibly. But the main thing that I would get from Voice of America was, you know, the current jazz albums, you know,
Right.
And then that would give me the clues of what they were and what labels and so forth. And there was a shop in London that was able to, that specialised in imports. So on those Saturday nights when we used to have the all-night listening parties, perhaps about 15 to 20 people crammed into one room. We just listened to all the new albums. So
Right.
it was great. And then throwing in some bits from Voice of America, of course, whatever.
Yeah.
But they were it was just a nice thing to do. Everybody really got into the music.
And I think the thing that struck Huey particularly was your sort of cataloguing the fact that you were so meticulous about, it would be that artist, that label, recorded
really?
one.
Oh,
Is that a John Mayall sort of characteristic? That's
probably, yeah. I do have an organisational thing.
Right. And before that, the first music you were exposed to was your father, who was a guitarist, and there was lots of jazz played in your very early years, Charlie Christian, Eddie Lang.
Yeah.
There was very much a jazz emphasis. What was the first blues conversion? Can you remember, like Peter Green said, it was Honeybee and Muddy Waters? Did you have like one track where you thought, that's amazing?
That's pretty, well, it was probably Eddie Lang and Lonnie Johnson, those early duets that they did together, was the first clue to it. It led to people like Leadbelly, Josh White, Big Bill Brunsey, and then in the piano scene it was Albert Emmons and Pete Johnson, Lex Lewis and so forth. Yeah, and then that steered me into the piano.
Right. And you played stringed instruments before you got onto piano, is that right? Ukulele, guitar.
Ukulele, yeah. You know, what was around the house.
But the piano was the one that felt best for you as a musician expressing yourself.
Well, they're both really, you know, things that I'd have a go at, you know, and utilize
right.
to perform or try and learn to play.
Right. And again, going back to sort of formative years, in the 50s, you did spend 3 years in Korea, in the Korean War. What kind of influence did that have on you, John Mayall, as a person, as to what came before and what you were when you returned from Korea?
Well, I was, you know, only there for 18 months out of the 3 years, but
right.
you know, I had my guitar there, and then when I was on leave in Tokyo, I bought a 6-string electric guitar, so that was good to have, because there wasn't any electricity to use there.
Right.
But you know, I did a fair bit of playing, and that kept me occupied.
And during the 50s with the Powerhouse 4 and then on early 60s with Blues Syndicate, did you sense that, were those your bands, were you a natural born band leader, that if a group of people came together it would be John Mayall that would eventually start calling the shots? Well, in a natural way?
Inevitably it would be, because you know, if you're a blues singer, obviously, you know, that's the heart of it. You perform, and you have a bass player and a drummer, and that's probably the foundation of any group that I would put together. But
in terms of leadership and actually organising, were you the effective leader of Powerhouse 4 and Blues Syndicate? Yeah. And then the next kind of crucial element was moving from Manchester to London,
right.
and the kind of conduit in that was Alexis Corner, I understand.
Yeah.
Where did you first meet Alexis?
Well, he had that wonderful Blues Incorporated, and when they played Manchester, I think we opened up for them one day as the Blues Syndicate, and so that's where I first met Alexis. I had seen him play the Flamingo prior to that, but you know, he was the first person who suggested that I could give it a shot in London, and he introduced me to Rick Gunnell, and you know, got my initial bookings together. So I went down from Manchester with the Blues Syndicate for one weekend, and we did 3 shows down there, and then went back up north again. But it was an introduction for me. So
right.
He introduced me to London musicians.
And then by January 1963, you thought, right, it's time to move. And
it was something that had to be done. The time was right for it. The guys in the Blues Syndicate, they didn't want to give up their day jobs or leave Manchester, so I basically came down on my own and started foraging around to put the Bluesbreakers together.
And that, I gather, started as a really informal jams in one pub and one place like that, and
no, not really. They were official gigs, you know. They were all you know, had to work.
So when was the first official John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers gig?
I have no idea. There were so many, a lot of. Obviously, it revolved around the Flamingo, because that was home based.
Yeah. And the first guitarist that you would say was Davy Graham. Was that?
Yeah, Davy and I hooked up. We did various duo bits here and there, but that was kind of the foundation for the very beginning. Yeah.
And the other bands that were sort of very much into R&B and blues, say if we said the Yardbirds and the Stones in the early 60s.
Yeah, well, the Stones were already established. The Yardbirds hadn't started up at that point, but very shortly afterwards they did, yeah. But
my question was that in terms of approach, the Stones in particular were for sort of 3.5 minute set pieces like that. And from the beginning, you had an idea, I understand, about the Bluesbreakers, that it was going to be freer and easier than that.
Well, a little less regimented, yeah.
I think a quote
dependent upon the improvisation.
Yes, that you saw that you within the Bluesbreakers created a mood, and whoever was featured would sort of improvise within that, and that's continued throughout, really, hasn't it?
That legacy comes, of course, from the jazz world, of course.
Mm-hmm. And the first record deal you had was with Decca.
Right.
Did you like getting into the business of music, John? Did you enjoy that?
Well, I wasn't really connected with the business. I mean, we went into the studio having got a deal with Decca. And I think we did independently. We did Crawling Up a Hill as a single.
Right.
with Mr. James as the B-side, and then that was put out by Decca as a single, and that led to us doing a live album at Fluke Sleep, which was my first album.
Right.
End of '64, came out in '65.
Right.
And didn't do well enough to warrant them keeping me on. So the deal with Decca was effectively over at that point.
Did you want to have some kind of chart success like the other bands that went a bit poppy, like the Yardbirds? You know, did you think with numbers like Blue City Shakedown, which are sort of the commercial end of blues, that
Yeah, very much so. Everybody obviously wants to reach as many people as possible, and the way to do that, of course, is to have a single out or something that will raise your position and put you in a better position to pay the musicians more, and to be able to effectively make it a little bit more comfortable.
Right. And also in '65, the big change that happened there was that's when you first heard Eric Clapton's playing within the Yardbirds.
Right, yeah.
There was a session that you did for the Immediate label with Jimmy Page, I think, in the producer's chair.
Yeah.
I'd be quite interested to see what your memories of that were, because part of the legend goes that it was there that Eric Clapton literally went against the face of all sort of received wisdom about recording and said, I want to record my guitar as it sounds in the clubs, with lots of feedback, with lots of overspill, and there was a big argument in the studio. Do you have any recollection?
No, that was sort of, I think that was a little bit of a debate when we did the Bluesbreakers album later, but the Immediate sessions were not like that. But I just do remember that, as far as I know, Eric was the first one to have discovered feedback. I mean, I don't know of anybody else who'd even come up with that idea. Maybe Pete Townsend had, but it seemed to me that was the first time anybody had used feedback.
And then also tried to record it in the studio as a much fatter sound, as on the B.
Yeah, I mean, the way we did it was with I'm Your Witch Doctor and Telephone Blues was just to get in there and play the way we usually did.
Right. And going on to that era about 1965, when Eric Clapton was beginning to develop this thing which then became the guitar hero syndrome,
right,
and the featured guitarist within the Bluesbreakers. I remember somewhere you said that at that point he was still getting his chops together. Did you have a kind of mentoring thing with him? Did you practice together a lot?
Not specifically. We shared the same interests and loved the same records and so forth. So we listened to stuff together, and obviously that was an influence on us. And
also in the sort of mid '60s or the early '60s, you backed American bluesmen like Sonny Boy Williamson, T-Bone Walker, John Lee Hooker.
Uh-huh.
What did that experience teach you as a band leader, as a musician?
I think that I learned most about dynamics from working with them. Usually at that point, I think everybody was kind of playing flat out, and there wasn't that much light and shade in it. But it just showed you could do, by playing on a quieter level or using the dynamics of with it, a lot more listening than just playing. I think we learned a lot from that.
Right. And within the mid-'60s, the Beano album, Bluesbreakers, John Mayall with Eric Clapton, was a big commercial success.
Yeah.
This was rare for a blues album. That started a whole new wave.
Mm-hmm.
I read somewhere that you just saw it as yet another album that recorded what you were doing at the time. It hasn't acquired the kind of the myth, legendary status that fans like myself would like to sort of put to it. Is it a special album within all your sort of collection for you?
Well, it was obviously very, very important to me because it was the first one we did with Eric, and that made a huge difference, of course. But basically, we just did go in the studio and we just played the stuff that we'd been, doing on the road.
Right. And then Eric, that began the sort of triumvirate of three guitar heroes, which was Eric Clapton, Peter Green and Mick Taylor. Mm-hmm. The idea that Eric Clapton was possibly closest to Freddie King, Peter Green was B.B. King and Mick Taylor was Albert King, is that just too simple?
It sounds reasonable enough, yeah. I mean, that would fit,
And it must have been very gratifying for you as a band leader to see three guitarists who started getting their chops together, and
Uh-huh.
within 1 year had progressed so much.
Yeah, well, I think Eric's influence really, started a whole, a lot of people playing. It kind of opened the doors for everybody of what could be done with the guitar, and of course there was a bit more knowledge and access to American blues music after that.
Right. And the classic story about Peter Green coming up to you when Eric Clapton had taken a holiday somewhere and was away, and you had various replacements.
Uh-huh.
Was that the case, that normally shy and self-effacing Peter Green came up to you at the Flamingo and was pretty persistent to say, I want to...
Pretty much so. He just wanted to have a tryout with the band. Yeah.
Right.
So it was. Yeah. So he did offer himself, of course. Yeah.
Right. And 3 times it happened that sort of 3 guitarists had made their name within the Bluesbreakers.
Uh-huh.
Was there any time where you felt a slight feeling of regret or just fact, that life is quite difficult? You build somebody up for them to go away from your band. Did you?
Well, not necessarily, because every time you lose someone, you get somebody else, and that changes the feel of it. It also brings a new excitement to it, a new stimulation to the proceedings, and things go on. So, anytime there's any kind of a personnel change, it's an exciting thing rather than something to be regretful about.
And it wasn't, say, when Eric Clapton left and the crowds went down for a while, so it said straight after that wasn't a scary prospect for you. You were fired up?
Not really, no. I figured people would be there. So,
Right.
if you believe in what you do, you don't really think of the negative aspects.
Right.
And we did have the bookings, so it was there.
Yeah. And comparing the Beano album, Hard Road, with Bare Wires, Bare Wires was a move towards the jazzy side of things.
Mhm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, well, that was one of the reasons that Peter decided he'd had enough. He wanted to, form a group of his own with a more traditional blues thing with B.B. King and people like that. So he didn't really care for the horns, which were more of a jazzy thing. So that kind of led to Peter and Mick Fleetwood splitting and going off as an offshoot.
Right. And Bare Wires, looking back, was that an album that you're pleased with?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was
very experimental, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also marked the sort of beginning of a direction towards jazz, which you then stayed with for
so compositionally, it was a different sort of challenge for me to come up with something which was more of a hybrid between jazz and blues.
Right.
Just by virtue of the fact of the musicians I was using,
Right.
John Heisman and Tony Reeves being the rhythm section, that definitely throws that into a different category.
And after Blues from Laurel Canyon, the big move then, which caused quite big waves at the time, was the drummerless band,
Right.
the Turning Point band.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking you got that idea from Jazz on a Summer's Day, listening to?
Yeah, that was one of the aspects, and listening to and playing with, people like Sonny Boy and hearing people like Hooker and so forth. It just showed that you could provide rhythm even on a very quiet scale, so that the smallest noises would have more of an effect on things.
Right. So again, dynamics.
Yeah, the dynamics, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when did you fall in love with California and decide that, having been in England for over 35 years,
Right.
got to move, room to move? When did you decide?
Well, the first time we went to America was at the beginning of '68, and of course it was a wonderful thing for me, because I just loved the climate, the way of life, which I'd been exposed to secondhand via records and via movies and books and whatever else. It just felt like the place where I belonged, and so that was totally the motivation. And I went back in the summer of '68 to have a 3-week vacation, and that gave me enough information for the Blues from Laurel Canyon album. But right from that point of first going over there, the decision was made to move there.
Was it lifestyle things like climate and culture, or was it the music scene?
It wasn't the music, no.
It wasn't, no.
Definitely.
You just fell in love with the place for
right, yeah.
its
yeah.
climate.
The music would be wherever you are, so.
Right.
But, when I did make the move, of course, I was able to hire musicians who I'd admired and I wouldn't have had access to when I lived in England. So,
right.
hence the jazz blues fusion era, where got to work with Red Holloway and Blue Mitchell and Freddie Robinson, of course. So
yeah, and Melody Maker said that was your best album ever. Again, looking back, does it stick out to you as a
well, that was an exciting period, and I think the CDs that we put together for this particular package, it really shows what we were like. There was no set lists or songs before we went on stage. We would just go. I'd call out a key and a tempo, and off we'd go. And so it was pretty much total improvisation, and the jazz guys really responded to that very well. I could count on them. Where I had Keith Hartley, of course, was still with me on drums. So we had worked together for so long before, and it just worked out really well.
Right.
And everybody had a great time.
Did you find with that kind of format there was the occasional gig that went sadly wrong, and then there's the occasional gig that went fantastically right? When it's as loose and risky as that.
I don't think we really thought about that. You just plow into it and just enjoy each other's soloing, and like I say, everybody's chops were so reliable, it couldn't really go very wrong.
Right. And then in 1979, tragedy in terms of the fire of your house. What did that teach you about life? You'd catalogued everything meticulously. There was so much information that literally went up in smoke.
Right.
How did you deal with that?
Well, it's something when you have no control over, so you just have to look for the positive things, and that is that you didn't get killed in the fire, and you can rebuild, and you have to. So it's this thing you don't have any choice about, really.
Right.
But I've always been an optimistic person, and you just go forward.
Right. Is there one particular thing that went up in smoke there that you do still think about 30 years
Yeah,
on?
my diaries. They were very, very detailed, and very many of them. So those perhaps more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
The music is still out there. You can obtain that, but you can never get back something that you wrote.
Right.
I mean, there were volumes and volumes, detailing every. The sort of detail that Bill Wyman kept in his diaries, those kind of diaries, So, of course, that was the biggest loss.
Right. So, if we sort of summarise the 70s as a kind of move for you that was towards a very kind of free and easy, virtually project by project, a band of musicians for a particular project, and then moving on to the next one. In the early 80s, you did look back a bit because you brought together John McVie and Mick Taylor, and the term Bluesbreakers came back in.
Right, yes.
What led to that sort of retro move?
I forget the details of it, but after the fire, I did stay over at John McVie's house, and I think it was probably during that period that Mick Fleetwood and John McVie were at the height of the Fleetwood Mac thing, and they just wished for the early days where they could just go and play the blues, So that was how it kind of took place, and then we made a phone call to Mick Taylor to see if he was up for it, and he was, and then we found that Mick Fleetwood had too much to do with the Mac and couldn't do it anymore, so we got Colin Allen, and it just came together very quickly. We announced it, we got all the gigs lined up, and it was on paper it was enough to to set up a tour of America and Australia. So that was the kind of 6-month thing which established that return of the Bluesbreakers.
And you decided to relive that Bluesbreakers term, the name.
Right, yeah, it was because of the lineup and the style of the music, yeah.
Yeah. Now then, another question, which is again about the business of music. You've had record labels. In terms of record labels, you've had through the years Decca, Polydor, Blue Thumb, DJM, Island, Silvertone, Indigo, Secret Records. Different record labels. Did it affect your product? Did you feel at times, that there was a definite sort of agenda was put to you about things, or
no? The record companies have never interfered or had any say really about if they've signed me specifically because of what I do, and so They've always left me alone. I've never had any kind of directives from record companies,
Right.
or any kind of input other than just to encouragement, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the Silvertone years, that was where you had the video made, and there was a Grammy nomination for that. Was
Oh yeah, yeah.
that was again a move towards a kind of more mainstream thing.
I suppose I'm not really sure. It doesn't seem. Yeah. Well, that was where there was material submitted that kind of fit what we were doing. I don't know. It just felt a gradual extension of the music.
Right, right. And now just making it onto a sort of lighter note, because I know you have lived in America since 1970, so we can't call you English, though we'd like to. But the term English eccentric is something that has occurred to me in the past, and I just want to run past a few sort of true or false stories about the John Mayall legend. Firstly, what we know is true about the tree house. Can you tell me why did you, at age 15, decide that a tree was the best place to live in the English climate in Manchester?
I don't know. I mean, that was the kind of the thing in the neighbourhood. People built tree houses, dens in the tree. So, I was just one of those in the neighbourhood who built a tree house. And I think, with a small house and a large family, we just needed the extra room. So, I just enjoyed, just like camping out, really.
But you camped out permanently?
Well, I mean, I slept up there and I had all my stuff up there, just like that would be my room.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you got into the national press on that as well, so that was
your
first taste
because
of fame.
it was kind of unusual, I guess, for the neighbourhood. It was mainly in the local papers,
Right, right. The other thing that I heard was that because you like the sun, always have liked the sun, that you on the transit van, you rigged up this frame on top of the roof,
right?
So that you could sunbathe during the very brief English summer. Is that a true story?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Put little 6-inch walls up so that if there were any police cars, they wouldn't see this body on the top there, and also to prevent me falling off.
So 4 or 5 hour journeys during the summer you would spend on the top there.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it was
Right.
it was a good idea.
The other thing about dodgy promoters, that were right in the early days of the Bluesbreakers, because you didn't believe the sort of underestimates of crowds that promoters told you would, before a gig, whilst everybody was arriving, go out in the freezing cold with a clicker.
No, that's false.
Right, well, I'm glad we've
No.
I think Huey Flint told me that. He said that you would stand there with a clicker.
No,
and then
I think roadies have sometimes done it, for just not necessarily because dodgy promoter, just to see if there's a percentage involved.
I see.
But, I don't think. No, I certainly didn't do it as far as I can remember.
So that is mythology. That is John Mayall mythology.
Yeah.
A broader question, John. When we spoke 2 years ago backstage, again on the sort of Peter Green Splinter Group thing, I asked when you'd be doing your biography, and was mightily taken aback when you said, "I'm only going to do it when I'm famous."
Oh, to publish it, yeah.
Yeah. Now then, that comment surprised me. Do you not regard yourself as famous as things stand?
Not in a commercial sense. I mean, if you go and ask most people who are not in the business if they've heard of John Mayall, most of the people they haven't heard of me. But if you're connected with music, you might have. But I just I've never had a hit record, so I mean it's still never had any kind of awards and not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or anything like that. So it's flying below the radar, really. So if you was to publish a book which would be a lifetime's work, I would want to expect a bigger audience than that, bigger sales. I mean, putting all that in, and there's plenty of time. I'm up to 1966 right now, so got a ways to go.
And how do you see the next 5 years panning out? What kind of time frames do you think in terms of?
Well, I don't think that far ahead. I think every year it's The plans already is going to be mapped out for next year, and that's the way it always is, you know. It's just a continuous thing. It's not like we have some great time off and then plan a new strategy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like January, we've got some gigs in Hawaii, and we come back, and then we're going to go to Australia for about, I think, 6 or 8 gigs over there. And there's talk of, then we'll do some American dates, and we've got a European tour being planned for March, and you know, it just goes on. Maybe Japan is making offers right now for May, so it all gets filled in.
And my last question, the need to write songs, is that as great now as it was in the very early days when you...
Well, it's fun to write songs because, you know, if you're out there singing about stuff, you want to sing about something you know about, so it's you know, something that I really enjoy doing.
And Peter Green told me that you were very much influential in the way that he approached songwriting, and there were some marvellous products like Black Magic Woman came out of it, in that you said to him, the way to do it is if you find a blues song that you really like, you take the first 3 notes in the melody and then develop it from there, and Peter got Black Magic Woman from Otis Rush, All Your Love.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember where you picked that particular approach up from?
Just probably that's something I've always done, I suppose. I mean, you have to have a starting point for anything. There has to be a mood. First of all, there has to be a story of what's going on, which suggests a mood, what style, whether it be a slow, fast, up, tempo, whatever. And then you just try and come up with a melody or a hook of some sort and build from there.
And this evening, going on to this evening's gig, you're recording the gig this evening at Basingstoke,
right?
Is that right? Is that for a release that's going to be coming out soon?
It will be for our website. You know, we have 3 albums on my website now, johnmayall.com, so it'll be one of those. The last one we did was of the UK Tour 2K. That's the title of that one. So, so it'll be, you know, representing what we're doing with the new material from Stories.
Right. John Mayall, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and have a great gig tonight.
Okay, we certainly hope so. All the others have been good.